Hey there. Remember that research paper you sent over about AI in healthcare? You know, the one that talks about using large language models to try and clear up those discharge summaries that can sometimes be, well, a bit confusing. That's what we're diving deep into today.
Oh, yeah. It's really fascinating stuff, especially with all the buzz around AI these
It
days.
does seem like every single day there's some new headline about AI, right? Like
Hmm.
AI is doing something amazing or maybe something a little scary. But this research, I don't know, it really stood out to
It
us
is pretty cool.
because it's not just about some far out concept, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
This has the potential to really impact people's lives in a real way.
Exactly. Think about those discharge summaries you get when you leave the hospital, especially from the ICU.
Yeah, those things can be a nightmare sometimes, right? So much medical jargon, and the print is always so tiny.
Exactly. And they're often so overwhelming that patients, maybe they don't completely understand what they need to do once they're back home.
Right.
And that can lead to problems like medication errors or even readmissions.
Or even worse.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we've got the problem, but how are these LLMs supposed to help? The paper called it simulating patient perspectives, which sounds pretty futuristic, if you ask me.
Well, think of it this way. Imagine you could ask an LLM to read a discharge summary and then tell you, okay, if I were a patient with a high school education, would I understand this? What parts would trip me up? It's
Uh-huh.
almost like having a virtual focus group, but way faster to help make that information easier for anyone to understand.
So they're teaching the LLM to basically think like a patient.
That's the idea.
That's wild, but how do they even do that?
Well, they use this really clever technique called in-context impersonation.
In context impersonation.
Yeah, so they give the LLM specific instructions to get it to kind of act like a patient with, certain characteristics.
So they're like telling it to pretend to be someone who's, I don't know, never gone to college or maybe hates going to the doctor.
Yeah, something like that.
That's like giving a computer like a personality test.
It kind of is. And the results they got were surprisingly interesting. The LLM was actually pretty good at getting the basic facts in the discharge summaries.
Okay.
For example, you could ask it, do you know the names of all your medications? And it could usually pull out the right answers from the summary.
Oh, wow. So it's not just spitting out random words. It's actually like making sense of the medical information.
Right.
I'm both impressed and a little freaked out, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, it's definitely both exciting and a little unsettling. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The LLM struggled with questions that were more about like the patient's feelings and perceptions.
Okay.
Like if you asked it, how easy was this discharge summary to understand, it often thought the summaries were much clearer than the actual patients did.
Oh, so the LLM might think you understand those instructions perfectly, but in reality, you're staring at them like they're written in ancient Greek.
Pretty much.
That's a problem, right?
Definitely. And it brings up a ton of questions about how we make sure LLMs are truly helpful in healthcare. We have to make sure they're not just mimicking information, but actually understanding how real people think and feel.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's something we should all be thinking about as we, as we explore this new tech.
For sure.
But let's not get ahead of ourselves, all right? You mentioned that the LLM was good at picking up the basic facts. So tell me more about that. Like, what kinds of questions did they ask it, and how well did it actually do?
Well, they asked it a whole bunch of different questions, ranging from simple ones about like remembering facts to more complex ones that required like figuring things out.
Interesting.
For example, they might show the LLM a discharge summary and then ask it.
And this is where we really start to see what these LLMs can do, right? So let's dig into those details in part 2. Stay with us.
They may show the LLM a discharge summary and then ask, what medications is this patient supposed to take? Or what are some warning signs they should look out for? That kind of thing. And the LLM was often able to pick out the correct answers from the summary.
So it was actually reading and understanding the summary just like a person would.
Well, almost. It definitely showed an impressive ability to, process the information and figure out the key details.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's still just a computer program.
Of
So
course.
it doesn't truly understand things the same way we do as humans.
Yeah, you're right. It's not like it's actually like feeling the patient's anxiety or frustration when they're trying to figure out all those complicated instructions.
Exactly. And that's such a crucial difference because those emotions, they can really impact how well someone understands and follows medical advice, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so the LLM can handle the hard facts, but it trips up when it comes to those more like subjective parts of understanding the information.
Yeah.
What are some examples of questions that really threw it off?
Well, those questions about perceived difficulty, like we talked
Yeah.
about before, those were a big hurdle for it. Like if you asked it, how confident are you that you understood everything in this summary? The LLM struggled with that.
So the LLM might say, oh yeah, totally got it. But a real person would be sitting there like, wait, what?
Exactly. It tended to overestimate, how well the patient actually understood, especially when the summaries were long and complicated, which makes sense if you think about it.
How so?
Well, the LLM is basically just looking at words and sentences.
Okay.
It doesn't have the same limits as our brains do when we try to process a wall of text, especially when you might already be feeling stressed or overwhelmed.
Oh, you know what? This reminds me of that time I got my wisdom teeth out and they gave me this giant packet of instructions.
No, yeah.
I was still kind of loopy from the anesthesia, and I just remember staring at this packet thinking, there's no way I'm going to remember all of this.
Oh, I bet.
It was too much.
That's a perfect example of how, things like pain or medication, just that feeling of being overwhelmed in general, can really affect how well you understand things.
Yeah.
And that's something the LLM, at least in its current form, just doesn't seem to grasp.
Yeah, it's almost like it's got like the reading comprehension of a straight A student, but the emotional intelligence of, well, a computer.
That's a great way to put it. And it just goes to show why this research is so important.
Okay.
It's not about, just building an AI that can pass a medical quiz.
Right.
It's about creating a tool that can actually understand and respond to the needs of real people.
Which means taking into account not just the information, but like you said, the context, like how the person is actually feeling.
Absolutely. It's about like bridging the gap between medical knowledge and actual human understanding,
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the types of questions they asked the LLM and how well it did. But how did they even test this whole simulating patient perspectives thing? Did they like round up a bunch of people and compare their answers to what the AI said?
That's exactly what they did. They got a really diverse group of people together with different levels of education, health literacy, and experience with the healthcare system in general.
So they were trying to like get a good sample of all the different types of pages you might see in the real world.
Exactly. They wanted to see how well the LLM could stack up against a wide range of human experiences, basically.
So how did it do? Was it able to accurately predict how real people would understand those discharge summaries? I'm dying to know.
Well, the results were kind of a mixed bag.
Wow.
In some cases, the LLM was like amazingly in sync with the human responses, especially when it came to those factual questions like, what are your medications or what do you need to do?
Okay.
But like we already talked about, it really had trouble with those more nuanced things like how difficult was this to understand or how confident do you feel? And remember that in-context impersonation technique we talked about.
Yeah, the one where they're basically telling the LLM to play pretend.
Yeah, that one. Well, they used that to compare the LLM's responses across different patient profiles.
Oh, interesting.
And what they found was the LLM was better at simulating certain types of patients than others.
Wait, are you saying the LLM had like favorites?
Kind of. It seemed to be really good at understanding patients who had higher education levels and more experience with the healthcare system.
So the people who probably need the least amount of help understanding medical jargon.
Right, exactly.
That seems kind of backwards, doesn't it?
It does. And it really highlights one of the biggest challenges of building AI for healthcare.
Right.
We have to make sure it's accessible and helpful to everyone, not just the people who are already comfortable navigating the system.
It's like building a fancy new wheelchair ramp that only works if you can already walk up the stairs.
That's a great analogy, and it underscores why it's so crucial to test these technologies with all kinds of people from all walks of life and address any biases that might pop up.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got an LLM that's got some strengths, but definitely some weaknesses too.
For sure.
But before we jump into those limitations, I want to hear more about those specific questions and answers.
Yeah, let's do it.
Give me some examples where the LLM either totally nailed it or totally missed the mark.
All right, well, there's this one question that comes to mind that asked about possible complications after being discharged.
Okay.
The LLM was really good at picking out specific warning signs from the summary, like things like fever or shortness of breath, or if your pain is getting worse.
Wow. So you were able to find those red flags that people should be watching out for.
It was. It was really good at understanding cause and effect, and it could accurately pull that info out of, a pretty complex medical document.
That's impressive.
Yeah, it was.
But I'm sure there were some questions where it wasn't as sharp, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like, what tripped it up?
Okay, well, there was one question that asked about those follow-up appointments. Like, when do you need to see your doctor again? The LLM had a really hard time with that one.
Why? What was so hard about that? It seems pretty straightforward.
Well, sometimes the summaries didn't say exactly when the follow-up appointment should be. It might say something like, follow up with your primary care doctor within a week or something.
Right.
And the LLM couldn't really understand that.
So it couldn't figure out that within a week meant the patient had to make an appointment sometime during the next 7 days.
Pretty much, yeah.
Oh.
It would get stuck on the fact that there wasn't an exact date.
Okay.
And it would often just give like a super vague answer like, it's unspecified or talk to your doctor about it.
So it was like afraid to make any assumptions, even though a person would totally understand what that meant.
Exactly. It just highlights how the LLM tends to get hung up on literal interpretations and has trouble with those more subtle parts of human language.
It's like it needs everything spelled out super clearly with no room for interpretation.
Yeah, kind of like that. And that's where those limitations really show up. It reminds us that as amazing as these LLMs are, they still have a ways to go before they can totally understand things like a human.
So they're a really cool tool, but not a replacement for, actual human judgment.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where we use AI to help us, not to do everything for us.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
This whole conversation has really got me thinking.
Oh, yeah.
It's incredible how far AI has come. And it's so exciting to think about all the ways it could change healthcare.
It is exciting.
Imagine a world where everyone gets discharge instructions that are perfectly tailored to their specific needs and how they understand things.
We know, right?
No more trying to decipher medical jargon or feeling overwhelmed by complicated instructions. That would be incredible.
It would be a total game changer. It could help people feel more confident about managing their own health too, and maybe even lead to better outcomes for everyone.
And it makes you wonder, what else is coming down the pipeline? What if someday we have AI that can not only understand all this medical information, but also offer emotional support and guidance to patients?
Oh, that's a big one.
It is, right.
It does raise a lot of ethical and philosophical questions, but it's definitely something worth exploring.
For sure. We're stepping into a whole new era of healthcare, and it's exciting and maybe a little scary all at the same time.
It is a wild ride. full of both challenges and opportunities.
Definitely.
And it's up to us to decide how AI will be used to make our lives better.
Well, I, for one, am really excited to see where this all goes.
Me too.
And to our listener, thanks for sending us this research paper.
Yeah, thanks.
It's really given us a lot to think about.
We hope you keep digging into this topic and stay curious about all the amazing things happening with AI in healthcare.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing. Okay, so let's get into those examples you mentioned, the ones where the LLM either totally got it right or totally missed the mark. What were some of the things that really stood out to you?
Well, one that comes to mind is they asked about those potential complications after being discharged, the ones that could pop up once the patient is back home.
No.
And the LLM was actually really good at picking out the specific warning signs that were listed in the summary, like fever, or if they have shortness of breath, or if their pain starts getting worse.
So it was able to identify those red flags the patient should be watching out for.
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty impressive.
It really was. It showed a good understanding of those cause and effect relationships.
Yeah.
And it was able to pull that info out of a medical document that, could be pretty complex and hard to read.
Yeah, for sure. But I bet there were some questions where it wasn't so sharp, right? Like, what were some things that really tripped it up?
Well, there was this one question about those follow-up appointments. Like, when do you need to go see your doctor again? And the LLM really struggled with that one.
Really? Why was that so difficult for it? Seems pretty straightforward.
Well, the thing is, sometimes the discharge summaries didn't actually give a specific date for the follow-up.
Right.
It might say something like, follow up with your primary care physician within 1 week. And the LLM had a hard time figuring out what that meant.
So it couldn't understand that within 1 week meant the patient needed to schedule an appointment sometime in the next 7 days.
Exactly. Yeah. It got hung up on the fact that there wasn't a precise date, and it ended up just giving a really vague response like unspecified or as directed by your doctor.
So it's almost like it was afraid to make any assumptions, even though a human would instantly understand what that instruction meant.
Exactly. And it just goes to show how LLMs tend to get stuck on those literal interpretations. They have a harder time grasping those more subtle aspects of human language,
Yeah, like it needs everything spelled out in black and white, no room for nuance.
Right, exactly. And that's where those limitations become really clear. It's a reminder that as sophisticated as these LLMs are, they've still got a way to go before they can really understand things like a human can.
It's a powerful tool, but not a replacement for human judgment.
Exactly. It's all about finding the right balance, right? Using AI to enhance our capabilities, not to completely replace us.
This whole conversation has really got me thinking. It's amazing to see how far AI has already come, and it's exciting to think about all the possibilities, especially in healthcare.
I know, right? It's really mind-blowing.
Imagine a future where every patient gets discharge instructions that are perfectly tailored to their needs and understanding.
No more deciphering medical jargon.
Or feeling completely lost and overwhelmed by these complicated instructions.
That would be a game changer for so many people.
It would. It could really empower patients to take a more active role in their own health. And who knows, maybe it could even lead to better health outcomes for everyone.
That's the hope, right?
Makes you wonder what other amazing breakthroughs are just around the corner. What if someday we have AI that can not only understand medical information, but also offer emotional support and guidance to patients?
Wow, yeah. That raises a whole other set of questions, doesn't it? Like, what are the ethical implications of that? And what about the philosophical side of things?
It's a lot to think about, but it's definitely a possibility worth exploring.
Absolutely. We're entering a whole new era of healthcare, and it's both exciting and maybe a little bit daunting all at the same time.
Definitely a wild ride. But it's a journey full of both challenges and opportunities. And ultimately, it's up to us to figure out how we want to use AI to improve our lives and our health.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, hey, to our listener out there, a huge thank you for sending us this research paper.
Yeah, thanks.
It sparked a really fascinating conversation. And honestly, it gave us a lot to think about.
We encourage you to keep learning about this stuff. Stay curious about the ever-changing world of AI and healthcare. Who knows what amazing discoveries are waiting for us?
And until next time, keep those brains buzzing.